Hi, everyone. Hi. My name's Renaud, and today I'm going to talk to you about fast prototyping and what we do at Gameloft Montreal. But first, I'm going to tell you a bit more about me, as my background is a bit unusual, and it's sort of relevant to the topic at hand. So I used to be an illustrator back in the day, but also a web developer, and then I moved on to do lots of stuff, ended up doing UX design for startups mostly, working on apps, working on services. And I've always loved working on games. So a few years ago, I created my own company with which I did consulting on all sorts of stuff, but also this thing is not working. Also, mini games and stuff like soccer racing, where it's soccer, but it's also racing. And did a lot of game jams. It was super catchy. And I'm also maybe known for these things, which are assets that are on the asset store, that you may or may not have seen. And a year ago, I joined Gameloft Montreal to lead the prototype team there. And that's going to be the subject of today's talk. Whoa, too fast. And now not enough. This way. So the prototyping team in Montreal has existed for a year now. It started with a team of one person, me, and now there's 5 of us. Over a year, we've tackled something like 30 projects, and for each project, we can do from 1 to, let's say, 5 prototypes. Each project can take from a day to, let's say, 3 weeks. And so it really varies from project to project. The reason why we prototype is also something that varies from project to project. Most of the time, it's to evaluate if something, an idea is fun or not, whether it's doable, and whether or not, people will like it. Is there appeal for this idea? We do that for ourselves, the studio, or the company in general, but also sometimes to convince third-party stakeholders that this idea would be good. So it's also a selling tool. The whole point, of course, is to reduce the risk, the costs, and to make sure that the effort that go into production are in the right direction. It's also a nice opportunity for serendipity, the idea of finding stuff that you didn't know you were looking for, and a good reason to experiment, and that's usually how we find our best ideas. We measure success on these prototypes mostly ourselves. We look at that and we're like, nah, that's really bad, so let's just throw it away. And we do that a lot over the 30 projects I mentioned earlier. Most of them have been killed. Some of them have been killed super fast, like day 1. We do, so the prototyping team and the people working with us, they do a lot of testing. We do internal testing, external play tests. We have a team that handles that, and we've started working on open betas, and we try to get, per project metrics, the idea that for, let's say, a skateboard game or a strategy game, you won't be looking exactly at the same thing. And we really only work on mobile games because that's what Gameloft Montreal focuses on. So today, I'm going to start with 10 tips, good practices, whatever you want to call that. Really guidelines that we try to follow loosely because we don't really have a method. But it's like, if you try that, it's probably going to be beneficial or not. And then I'm going to talk about a case study, like probably the first prototype I did at Gameloft Montreal, which is a good example of how you can achieve some result in 1 week. And then the last part will be about game feel, which is something we really focus on, and which is a great way to improve your prototypes. And first, I have like a short video of what we've done over the last year. Thank you. Thank you. So as you've seen, it's really, it goes in all directions. It can be a game where you shoot zombies or whatever, to a strategy game, to a tycoon, to every new week brings a new project, and that's what I really love about the job. And a cool thing to keep in mind is the duration of each of these projects. So it goes from 1 day, for the truck example over there, I'm going to talk a bit more about it later on, to 2 weeks, 3 weeks for some, and some take only one person, some take more than that. So yeah, 10 tips. I used to work in advertising, so it's sort of stuck. Not too fast. Go back. All right. So really the first one, and probably the most important one, is to pick the right scope. So what I mean by that is people, they come to me and they say, okay, I have an idea, I have a pitch for a game, and I want you to do a prototype for it. And the game is going to be about aliens invading the Earth, but as the player, you control a guy that can go into a vehicle and move to a rocket ship and go to other planets. And now I'm pitching No Man's Sky, but it's something else. And so it's full of big ideas, and all of them are probably really good, but we don't have really the time or resources to do everything, and if we did everything, it wouldn't be a prototype anymore. So we pick a scope, and we focus on what the person who had the idea wants to demonstrate. What's new about your idea? What's the trick? What's the catch? And we focus on that. We try to isolate that and pick something that is doable in 3 weeks, or less. A good example of that is this thing called 50 Buddies, which isn't actually a prototype, but a game that we created in 6 days and put on the stores, or is about to be put on the stores. And it was done for a charity that collects games from different publishers, and they put it online. And for this game, so we only had 6 days. There was 6 people involved. So we really had to do some choices. We needed to have something that was fun, replayable, and so on. So we went for, a game where you push people in the water. We only had 1 hour to find an idea, so I had to go fast. But we still have procedurally generated levels, procedurally generated characters, and it works on all devices. So it's really cool. Focus on the unknown. It's basically the same idea. It's that don't prototype stuff that works, whether you've done it before, whether somebody else has done it before, you've seen it in another game. If you're planning on doing exactly the same thing for that specific feature, well, don't even test it. It probably works. Instead, identify what's core to your game, what's unique, and that doesn't necessarily have to be gameplay or code. It can be you want to test the visuals, you want to test that new shader that you thought of, you want to test maybe a new kind of character that just doesn't have 2 arms and 2 legs. So focus on that. So in this example, the idea was to create a game packed with features where you can do acrobatics and you can destroy the terrain in innovative ways and so on. But really what the player was supposed to do a lot was jumping and shooting. So the prototype only focuses on that, and sure, you can destroy the terrain, but it's purely because we could. All the effort was put on the mobile controls to calibrate the jumps and have all that feel good. And as you can see, it's just cubes, really. Basically no art at all, just Unity and post-processing effects, and it's super simple. But the player has all the info that they need. Keep things separated. Instead of going straight forward to a polished game that would have everything, the art, the gameplay code, the meta maybe, we really focus on that because mobile games. instead of doing that, we try to do work separately, and like 1 or 2 persons will focus on the gameplay, the code, and have that run separately from the art. And maybe at the end, maybe we'll put all that together to create an actual product. It doesn't even have to. We just have these gyms, and we can evaluate things like that. A good example of that is this game where you are supposed to sort of repair cars that come and go. And we worked on one prototype that was really hard to put in players' hands. We worked on the art, and we worked on the economy of it all, because you had to use resources to do stuff. And all that worked quite well, and we just had to put all that together. And in a few days, we had this that was fully testable with good UI, at least understandable UI. And we could put that in the hands of testers. And embrace failure. As I said, most of our projects get killed by ourselves, by management, by players, and it's fine. It's really fine. That's the whole point. The whole point is in a month, let's say, instead of doing 1 version of your idea, do 10 versions of your ideas. And maybe you'll find more than 10. You know, while doing this 10, you'll find an 11th and a 12th one. And hopefully one of them will be good enough. So just learn from your mistakes, rebound, and it's as long as you've not lost like a year on that, really doesn't matter. Like we were asked to do a football game, and it was supposed to be multiplayer and real time, and we said, okay, let's do that. And after a week of trying to sync just a ball over different devices, we're not really good at network. We just said, okay, it doesn't work, and we rebounded and made an AI instead, which proved also super difficult. But at least we had something playable at the end. And in the same vein, you know, fake it. It doesn't have to be real. It doesn't have to be something that has to pass QA and everything. It just has to be good enough. As long as the player understands, as long as the emotion or the feeling that you want the player to understand works, it's good enough. We don't do polished art. I do like all the art direction myself in one afternoon usually, just because nobody really cares. As long as it's a cube and you understand that it's moving, well, it's fine. And we push it, when we need cars, for example, maybe it's important to understand that the car banks left and right. So yeah, in this case, go for a more detailed model, if that's the focus of the game. But really reuse stuff. We find stuff on the asset store or wherever, or use boxes. Boxes are fine. So it's really about putting the minimum effort possible to do what works. And a good example of that would be this thing. So someone in the studio had this idea floating around of doing some sort of strategy game where you attack the other player's castle, but it's a castle on wheels. It's a truck, and it's probably, like this movie where a guy and a dog, they sort of race through the desert, and it's a good movie. And it's a nice idea. I love the idea, but like doing it, implementing it, there was not a big traction on this project. So I said, okay, I can do something in one afternoon. And I did this with Unity and Timeline, just reusing, actually creating the trucks and the cars using Asset Forge. And in less than an afternoon, I had this going around, explosions and trucks, and you sort of understand the game. I had this running on device, 60 FPS. I could show it to people, and they were like, oh, can I play? No, you can't. There's no game. There's nothing. But give me time, and then you'll be able to play. So instantly, there was that spark of, okay, I see exactly what you mean, and could you add this and this and that, and there could be helicopters, and yeah, sure. But for now, it's just a fake thing. That is on device. You could move the camera around. Everybody's happy. And at Facebook, you know, they say move fast and break things. I try to do the opposite and sort of move fast and fix things. The idea behind that is to say that, of course, your code, when working on a project for 3 weeks, is going to be a bit weird. Try to make it like solid and robust for just the scope that you want. Like, of course, in the end, your game is going to be multiplayer. Of course, in the end, your game is going to be something else. But just focus on that scope and try to say, okay, I'm making maybe a racing game. What are the things that my code should, like maybe my car controller should be able to allow? What flexibility does it have? And let's focus on that. So you build a foundation that is strong enough to allow for experimentation, and then you can have fun and figure out new things. You know, what if I change the gravity? What if I change the speed of the car? And I have an example of that, which is a racing game. And we needed to have like minimum controls, but we also wanted to have different cars and different feel to the cars. So we built a controller that allowed for that, and that allowed us to switch models and switch settings quite easily. Picking the right tools, of course, is critical. We use Unity for most of what we do, simply because that was the tool I was familiar with before, but also because it's actually really good. And it's compatible with everything that we need, all the tools that we use on the side, such as Houdini, Jenkins, HockeyApp, GitLab. We also use the MM-Tools, which is a library I developed for my Corgi engine and other assets, just because, you know, I coded it, so why not? And all that gives us a right toolbox. You can do also prototypes using different things, like PowerPoint would work for demonstrating the workflow of a game. You know, even pen and paper, you can test your rules with that. So there's really no limit, and as long as you get your idea across, it's a good tool. Here's a video that showcases how we use Houdini mostly to do other stuff. What's really cool with Houdini is that there's the Houdini engine that allows you to use what you create, the procedural stuff that you create in Houdini, in Unity directly, and that has helped us a lot on many projects. We use it to generate levels, to generate characters, to generate basically everything that we need, and that gives us a lot of content really fast, especially because none of us is a 3D artist. So all we do, you know, is mostly blocking, but we can also get paths from that. We can get, we use it a lot. It's really cool. And then it's super simple to import. And we use Jenkins to build stuff. But hopefully, with what I've seen over the past few days, I think we won't have to do that in the near future. So that's cool. And yeah, the product that you get, make it awesome. Try to put the cherry on top and focus on the core feature that the player will do a lot. If you do that, the player will feel rewarded. It will help with learning, you know, your rules, and it's going to be memorable. People will remember what you've done. Like in this game, which was like the ancestor of the more complex one, the player was supposed to do a lot of maneuvers, like using a nitro to avoid stuff. And so we just made it really fun to use the nitro button. And every time you would do it, you would get this circle of particles, and really it's nothing, but it helps. Test often and test correctly. I like to do guerrilla testing, which is really, really bad play testing, but it's fun to just get a reaction, and it's still better than doing nothing. But we also have tools to do things like the scientific way, which is the one I prefer, and we try to get objective data as much as possible using, you know, large samples of testers. So that's what it looks like. When we do external testing, we get a camera of the player, maybe also the face, and we can see basically the user react to the thing and analyze that afterwards. So it's extremely useful. And of course, have fun. Creating a game is fun. I really think it's the most fun job I've ever had. Because I just don't have to care about the consequences of all the things we come up with. But it's really fun. And yeah, whether you're doing prototypes or anything, just speak up, show your work. What we've done is we've put a TV just above us. So people, they pass by and they're like, oh, it's cool, or it looks really bad. And they tell us, and we discuss it, and we get new ideas, feedback, and that's a good way to just show your stuff. I had listed a bit of tips, and the first one was avoid procedural. And the other day I was like rehearsing this talk, and I was like, that doesn't really sound right. I just said the opposite. So I just struck it. And the idea is that if you have the tools to do procedural, and if you have the tools to do it in a way that doesn't impact anything on your core features, the things you want to demonstrate, and it's just a way to add more content, then it's fine. But really do it if only it doesn't get in your way. Don't try to demonstrate how you could generate a really complex dungeon if what you want to demonstrate is how the sword works. Test on real devices, of course, and keep things simple. Again, the key thing is the scope. If you pick the right scope, you're going to be good. More Unity tips, I guess. We use the asset store a lot. When we don't know how to do something or we don't know how to model things, we just pick something, buy something. We use Cinemachine a lot. It's like my favorite asset. All the projects that you've seen use Cinemachine in a way, just for the noise sometimes, but it's so good. Odin, Amplify Shader, Effect Cores, VFX Pack is also really good. We also use, whoa, too fast again. We also use tools like Magica Voxel. I do most of my 3D models in Oculus Medium, the VR thing. It's just super fast, and I just don't know any other way, really. But like the characters you may have seen in the soccer game, where there were like 4 of them, and I did them all in one afternoon. Animated them using Mixamo, and put them in a game. So really it's as fast as it can be. I use AssetForge for basic cars and stuff. You can find icons, sounds, lots of stuff on the internet. So now I'm going to talk to you about one game. The first prototype I did when I arrived, so a year ago now. The game was called Catch Me at the time, and the pitch was basically Pac-Man in terms of gameplay, but with a twist. You could collect characters that would have abilities, and you would play a game of thieves and cops in a setting sort of like the old Arsène Lupin, Victorian era stuff. And it would look, no? Okay. It should move, doesn't move, it moves. So on the first day, I really focused on movement. It's a Pac-Man game, more or less. So you want the character to do movement quite right. And I tried different things, like grid-based and completely fluid, and have something follow something else. And I ended up picking the first one. Then I moved on to collisions and cameras, added some obstacles, and instantly I had something that looked more or less like a game. Again, I used Cinemachine for the camera, so it's really basically a drag and drop. And it instantly works, and it's more or less already Pac-Man. Then I added some AI. I'm not that good at AI programming, so I just picked the A-Star project from the asset store, did a bunch of tweaks, and I had yellow cubes following my red cube around, and ta-da, you've got a game. So From there, I just had to add abilities because that was the whole point of the thing. So the game designer had this idea that you should be able to go through walls in a way. It could be phasing, teleporting, jumping. So I just implemented them all and picked jump because it was the most obvious for the player. And just having to explain phasing to people is too complex. Then I added coins because you were supposed to, of course, collect more of them. And during all that time, I had 0 collisions, 0 game loop. When I get caught by one of the yellow things, nothing happens. And it doesn't have to because there's already enough pressure. Everybody knows Pac-Man, and you know that these things are dangerous, so you just run away. And if you run away, it already works. Then, controls. I tried a virtual joystick, so all that is on mobile, of course. Virtual joystick, swipes, arrows, mix of these. Did a bunch of testing, internal, and ended up realizing that everybody prefers something else, so I didn't really learn anything. But now I had the choice, and we could, later on do more tests on that. On the last day, I added more abilities because now I had my ability system, so I added dash and fireball and stuff like that, trying every time to make it feel good. Like this one was supposed to be a cop, and that could dash, and sort of hit the wall quite hard when catching the thief. As you can see, I can go through the thief. The thief is the red one. It doesn't really matter. You can make your own rules in your head. And so yeah, the style was supposed to be cops and thieves, and all these mood boards would apply. But in the meantime, somebody had an idea for what if instead of thieves and cops, it would be fairy tales. So Red Riding Hood fleeing from a dragon from the Chinese mythology or something. So I did this mock-up just to sell the idea and see how it would look. Grabbed a bunch of assets, I think, from the asset store. And I had this in one afternoon because it was just a matter of replacing the cubes with rugbymen from my previous rugby game. So it's really fast, and it looks acceptable for people who don't really understand cubes, if needed. I think in this case the cubes were enough, but people. So yeah, that's how you can do something in 7 days. Actually, less than that, but I sort of separated the steps. And it's really not about speed. It's not a race, but it's just the idea that you don't have to waste a lot of time on that. It's doable with minimum time. The next part is going to be about game feel, which is like a passion of mine. I used to work on apps, and in apps, something that comes up frequently is something called micro-interactions. So it's the idea that the sum of all the things that allow the app to give you feedback on what you're doing. It can be the heart on Twitter that explodes instead of just changing state. Would be enough, but it explodes. So you want to do it again. So you do it again, and you engage with the app, and it's their business model, so more money, and they are happy. Can be stuff that is like pull to refresh, introduced by Facebook, and it's playful, so you refresh and refresh, just because it's like playing with an elastic. And you make page views, and they get more money, and everybody's happy. And that kind of stuff, is a good way, when used properly, it's a good way to create that feeling of fulfillment and reward. So here's an example. In this game, the brief was, I have a character that has a machine gun, enemies are coming at it, and they die if I shoot at them, all right? So quite simple. And if I look at this first version, I've already done everything, right? I have projectiles coming from my gun, and when they hit a red cube, they disappear. But what if I add actual projectiles? It's already much better than explosions when the projectiles hit. Shells emitting from the gun, and recoil. So now the gun is like moving back when I shoot. Muzzle flash. Haptic feedback, so this one you don't see, but it's these tiny vibrations you get when using, like high-end phones, and it's like vibrations, but subtle. More explosions. So now, instead of just having an animated explosions, the cube actually break into pieces. Camera shake, of course, more visible if I stop shooting at some point, but like it's right now, it's all the time. Dynamic light coming from the gun. Freeze frames, something I love from versus games. It's the idea that you freeze the screen for a short duration on kill. Flash on the screen, spread. Projectiles are going everywhere now. And all that can be done in a really short time, but it makes quite a difference. And that's how you can get that, wow, that's really cool, feeling from people that play the game. The first one would have less of a chance to incite that reaction. And you can do more. You can add slow motion. So now every time I shoot, things are super slow. And they go back to speed, and that's really fun. And you can do that on all aspects, like, and it's stuff that we can reuse also, because like health bars are commonplace. And you could just have the bar go, but it bounces, it flashes. There's a delayed bar behind that. It's really fun. If you want to know more about feedbacks, I would recommend Dan Saffer's book called Designing with Details. It's really about apps and websites, but the logic behind that is, I think, universal. And then there are two videos on YouTube. One is called Juice It or Lose It, and the other one is The Art of Screen Shake by amazing people, and that get much more in depth on that subject and really inspirational. One thing that I've created recently for my Unity assets is called Feedback. It's part of the Tools library, and something I plan to open source at some point. That's why I'm mentioning that. I really wanted to have that like now, but it actually takes some time to package. So it's a library that focuses on feedback, and the idea that with one line of code, you can add juice to your game like that. The way it works is like this. So I have a character, the blue guy with the glasses, and he can dash. Okay, so I press the dash button, and then there's a dash. So in my dash class, I just add this line, and what this line does, so it's a feedback declaration, and it gives me this inspector. And in this inspector, I'll be able to trigger animations, particles, instantiate objects, VFX, spawn stuff, play sounds, add camera shake, screen shake, zoom, chromatic aberration, flashes of the color I want. So all that can be done without one line of code, and you get that in, like, that's real time. So less than a few seconds, and boom, you get juice, I guess. So yeah, I think I'll put that on GitHub at some point. Just need to document it and everything. But there are many tools like this around, and you can find them, you can create your own, you can share them, and it's really cool if you prototype to like reuse what you've done. So that's pretty much it. The key takeaways would be pick the right scope, really, it's critical. There's no secret to the speed we're going at, it's we pick the right scope. Try to make it awesome, don't just stick to programmer art. Even if you're just a programmer, there's many ways you can put, that cherry on top of your game, and do that quickly, iterate quickly, test frequently. And by the way, we are hiring, so if you see me around, just come and say hi. Thanks a lot. And if you have questions, please use the mics that are.
Howdy.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering, so when a game that you've prototyped goes into production, are they going to be building on your code? So do you have to worry about extensibility and stuff when you're coding, or can you just be as dirty as you need to be just to get it done?
That's a really good question. No, everything is throwaway. Most of the games we do don't even use Unity in production, so it's ported to a different engine. The way it works is they scrap everything, the art, the code, everything. So that's critical also. Even if you could, don't do it. Just throw everything away, because that way you don't have to, like when you code, you're not like, yeah, but it's gonna be multiplayer at some point, so I'm gonna have to think about determinism and that kind of stuff. Just don't think about it. You're doing something small that you will use as a direction. It's like a sketch for drawing.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was wondering, is there a lot of asset and script reuse between all of these different projects?
Yeah, there's quite a lot of reuse. The library that we use, the MM tools I mentioned, we use that in all of projects. I think we reuse controllers sometimes, the input, all that is input related, VFX related. We reuse a lot of explosions and stuff because, I mean, one explosion is enough for most projects that we do.
And also, how do you determine the amount of polish that's required for the intended audience?
So it's really subjective.
Yeah.
We look at it and we're like, is it impressive? And we decide, like, internally.
But I mean, different people might require like different amounts of pow and pizzazz.
Yeah. We try to aim for the highest amount of boom, you know?
There you go. All right.
There's no rule, really subjective.
Hi. Do the prototype team use any custom tool to create like template projects, or do the team has a own asset library?
We sort of have a template that we are supposed to reuse from project to project, but we always forget to use it. So we spent a week doing it, but like putting it together. But no, we just have we have some sort of we have a repo on GitLab, which is the tool we use for version control, where we put like all the stuff we think we might reuse, and then we pick from that, you know, based on what we need to build.
Thanks.
Hey, I was hoping if you could tell me like the relationship of paper prototypes in your guys' pipeline. Like, how do I phrase this right? At what point in time do you move from paper to digital?
Extremely early.
Extremely early?
Extremely early. I'd say the idea is that usually there's going to be a lot of rules involved, you know, and an economy, and because it's free-to-play games, so somebody has to pay, and it's not us. So we have these rules, and these are done on paper or in Excel or something. And what we do when we do prototypes, we really do sketching, and just to get everybody on board. We'll do a sketch of what the level should look like or what the interaction should be. Maybe, I think once for a card game, we like drew cards and played with them. Whatever works, really.
Okay, thank you.
Do you take care of the code quality, thinking that if the proto works, a team is going to reuse it or is going to start by zero?
No, they always start from scratch. So what we do is we show them the prototype. We explain the team that is going to, you know, continue the project. Really, we try to pinpoint the parts where we put the effort, because when you look at like 2 cubes jumping around, it's not obvious what works and what doesn't. So we're like, okay, what you need to do is have this squash and stretch, because it sells the movement, it sells the direction of the jump, and then other players can understand where the enemy is going to land, so it's easier, you know, that kind of stuff. Where what we tried that works, we also explain what didn't work. Most of what we do doesn't work, so we're like, okay, here's what you should just ignore now. And then they start from scratch, yeah. And we sort of try to accompany them on their journey building the game.
Thank you.
Hey.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, so in your experience prototyping so much and starting so many games from scratch and building so many different movement schemes, I was wondering if you had any tips or rules of thumb when it comes to prototyping a movement method. For example, the slide you had with the 4 blocks moving around. Do you use physically based movement? Do you just set position, set velocity, add force, etc.?
It's a good question. I think it depends on what your character is gonna encounter, in the game. I'm a big fan of doing my own controllers, not using physics, having something really tight, using raycasts usually. That was the whole point of the Corgi engine. It's tight, but it won't be the good choice for prototype maybe if you want to have surprises with physics and that kind of stuff, reactions with the environment. So I'd go with raycasts and simple translation for simple stuff where you don't have a lot of interactions, and physics for everything else.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay. So I see that apart from the gameplay, you put a lot of emphasis on the game feel. So do you work first on the gameplay and then on the game feel, or is it more of an iterative process between one and the other, and where do you draw the line?
We try to put game feel as soon as possible. So of course there's a first pass of gameplay, like let's say the character jumps. Initially, instead of having cubes floating around, it was just like okay, and actually quite bad. So then you do some gameplay code just to have the jump right, okay, and have it do a nice curve and a nice, you jump faster than you fall, or the opposite, depending on what you want. And as soon as we have that, let's add squash and stretch. Let's add a puff of smoke from where you were and a trail maybe behind you, that kind of stuff. So it's a parallel process, and especially now that there's 5 of us, we are enough that we can, split that kind of stuff.
Thank you.
Hi. You mentioned how you get a lot of things from Houdini in your Houdini pipeline. Can you just talk more about that, I guess?
Okay. So what we do with Houdini is we have one guy, Pascal, at our studio that is really, really good with Houdini, and what he does is we give him maybe one prop and we give him one direction, and he's going to be able to create words starting from that. And that's really amazing. So we use that for generating levels. We use that for generating assets, so 3D assets really. But we also do that to just to process data and get information. We can do that to generate characters. The possibilities are really endless. We also use that sometimes for VFX. So it's really a cool product, and they have tons of examples of how you can mix Unity with it on their website, and it's a good resource.
You mentioned using the asset store and a lot of the Unity toolkit that exists. Do you maintain any kind of internal library of stuff that you find that you need to use over and over again or do over and over again? Like if you need to implement controls, a joystick system in multiple different prototypes, do you reuse code that you've already written, or what do you?
Yeah. We have a repository where we put all that, and usually what we pick on the asset store is one-time use. We need, a pirate ship, and chances are we only need that once. And then there's libraries that we create or that I had from the past and input, and that we store and reuse. I think we have time. We don't.
For more?
One more.
How do you know when it's time to kill an idea? Are there any indicators that let you know that it's time to drop it?
The look on people's faces when they kill it. Like if you see a spark, maybe continue. If you don't, drop it. Whether it's by explaining your idea or when showing something that you have, you usually you get it. But it's from experience, I guess. I think we don't have time for any more questions, but I'll be around. If you have questions, just come and say hi.